Hello, I'm Alex Jones, a syndicated radio and television host based in Austin, Texas. And for many years, I've been exposing the criminal activities of the global elite, also known as the New World Order. And this collection of power-mad megalomaniacs has been using a successive string of terrorist events to usher in their corrupt world government. A world government where populations, their own documents show, will be herded into compact cities, will be issued national ID cards, and yes, even implantable microchips. But in this film, we're first going to look at some historical examples of tyrants and governments, oligarchies alike, using crises, in many cases, terrorist events that they themselves perpetrate against their population, against their own bureaucracies, to create a crisis, to get the people to exchange liberty for so-called security. We're going to look at some historical examples of this, going back to Nero burning Rome to blame it on the Christians, and then fast-forwarding to Adolf Hitler burning the Reichstag shortly after being elected, the governmental building, to blame it on his political enemies, to destroy their Bill of Rights and Constitution, and to announce martial law. Then we'll look at the Northwoods document from 1962, where the Joint Chiefs of Staff and many other sectors of the federal government to the highest levels were planning to blow up airliners full of Americans, full of American citizens. Then we're going to fast forward to the federal government training the drivers, cooking the bomb in the horrible attack, the first attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. They were caught doing it. It was in the news, but got brushed aside. The FBI was caught on videotape admitting it, bombing the World Trade Center complex to get their agenda through. Then, of course, 1995 with the Oklahoma City bombing. Again, staggering amounts of evidence, an absolute proven fact that the government had prior knowledge and was instrumental in engineering the attacks on the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City. And then, of course, none of you have to be reminded of the tragic events in 2001 on September 11th. My friends, the government just didn't have prior knowledge of September 11th al-Qaeda attacks. They actually funded, trained, protected, coddled, shepherded al-Qaeda into this country, trained many of the terrorists at the Pensacola Naval Air Station, USA, threatened FBI and defense intelligence officers who tried to stop al-Qaeda, threatened them with arrest. Bush signed, now public document, W199I, 2 months before September 11th, threatening them with arrest if they tried to stop al-Qaeda. And now his approval rating went from 45% to 90+%. The USA Patriot Act that has just eviscerated the Bill of Rights and Constitution has been passed, and yes, it pertains to Americans. Their cashless society, compact city, control grid is falling into place. The people were preconditioned before all of these terrorist attacks to give up their liberties, and then the government will be able to protect them from terrorists. Look at who really stands to gain from this. Look who has the motive. You know, we tripled the FBI's anti-terrorism funding in 1996 after Oklahoma City. They didn't protect us in 2001 from al-Qaeda, did they? No, they funded and protected them, took their names out of the customs computers, took their names out of the airport computers. Nurse bin Laden back to health in a U.S. hospital. You're going to see all the evidence. We had a war on drugs. There's triple the heroin, double the cocaine on our streets. Government's own numbers than there was 8 years ago. Our prison population has gone from 1.3 million to 6.5 million in the last 2 years, going into 2002, with the numbers only expanding. We had a war on poverty. There's more poverty. A war on illiteracy. There's more illiteracy. Now they're going to have this war on terrorism. You're going to see only escalations in it because the government only gets more power, more control over our lives, more funding after each horrible event. 12 people die at the first World Trade Center attack, 168, Oklahoma City, 3,000 plus, the second World Trade Center attack by the government. And now they're telling us, get ready for more attacks. And yes, if we don't take microchips, if we don't accept a microchip population, then we're going to get attacked again. And already the states admit they'd already been implementing a national ID card scheme. And then, of course, the total goal. Why the New World Order is pushing all of this. We know they want tyranny. We know this global government is behind it. They're now publicly talking about a New World Order. How did they get all this? And what's their final goal? A world population reduction of 80% everyone crammed into compact cities, and yes, the United Nations is preparing to release mass plagues on the earth because the elite want the life extension technology for themselves. They know that technology is a double-edged sword that can be used to empower humanity or that can be used to totally enslave humanity. And they know they're in a race against time, that their window of opportunity is closing. And they've got to dehumanize us. They've got to enslave us here on the global plantation now, or they're going to lose control. The New World Order is run by absolutely ruthless individuals, hell-bent on dehumanizing the entire human community, obsessed with total control. These megalomaniacal Satanists are absolutely sworn to the creation of a worldwide tyranny called the New World Order. This is the evidence, and it is conclusive. 911, the road to tyranny. War. Empires are built and maintained by it. Populations rally during time of war. Nothing centralizes power like it on Earth. All throughout history, leaders have used this unifying force to control populations. Humans instinctively shift into mindless groupthink when faced by an outside threat, whether real or manufactured. But now, in the 21st century, the system of control continues, but with more sophistication. You see, if there isn't an enemy to fight, you have to manufacture one. In AD 64, on the 10th of August, Nero, emperor of Rome, set the city ablaze while he fiddled. You see, he had a problem. The Christians were getting too popular. Of course, after he torched Rome, people were more than happy to rip them limb from limb in the arena. The persecution of the Christians is only one of many ancient examples of governments persecuting populations after creating crises. On February 15, 1898, treason was committed by William McKinley's Navy when they blew up their own ship in Havana Harbor to create a pretext for war with the Spanish government. Adolf Hitler had already been elected president, but he wanted to abolish the chancellery and make himself Führer. And to do that, he had to create enough of a crisis to create massive levels of fear in the population so that they would willingly lay down their republic and give it into the hands of this monster. On the night of February 27, 1933, Adolf Hitler's stormtroopers, historical documents now conclusively show from Nazi archives, burned the Reichstag government building to the ground. A wave of arrests then took place across the Reich as the Führer told the people, "Yes, I will protect you. You will have a utopia world. Everything will be given to you by the state as long as you offer total fealty and support of your Führer." The people bought the utopia and were totally enslaved.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
It may have been a surprise attack to the American people, but not to the federal government and the military. Months before the attack, they knew the Japanese were preparing for an all-out assault in the Pacific. And now even the History Channel admits, as well as any other historical record, that Roosevelt 12 days before knew the actual date of the attack. They had Admiral Yamamoto's communique saying on the morning of December 7th, we'll attack the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and deal a death blow. Roosevelt had campaigned on keeping America out of the war. But his backers had been funding the Japanese war machine for years, as well as funding and encouraging Hitler's blitzkrieg. They needed a global crisis to bring in a global government and the birth of the United Nations. That's why 6 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt had the Naval Command remove the code-breaking machines from Pearl Harbor as well as dismantle the radar. They had to have the crisis to create this global system of tyranny. Think of the dastardly deed they had committed, leaving our troops, our sailors, our boys to die. You see, the global elite had attempted to create a League of Nations at the end of World War I. World War II had to be bigger. and on a larger scale so the people would say, give us a global government to protect us from these horrible wars.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
In the early 1960s, the federal government needed an excuse, a pretext to invade Cuba. Seldom do we see examples as sterling as the Northwoods document, where the federal government actually put the plan to paper. It was actually carried in published media reports in ABC News and, of course, the Baltimore Sun. The federal government proposed blowing up airliners full of Americans, saying that casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of indignation. The mad general, the architect of this plan, was General L.L. Lemonster, Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. He got approval for his Faustian plan all the way up to the Secretary of Defense. President Kennedy was not amused. In the plan, they elaborated on how they could bomb Washington, D.C. and blame it on Cuba. Attack Marines at Guantanamo Bay using U.S. Army soldiers dressed up as Cubans. Or, they said, just like the sinking of the Maine to get into the Spanish-American War, we could blow up a ship again. Here they are admitting the problem-reaction-solution system and how effective it is to motivate the American people to get them behind a war, a nuclear war with Cuba and the Soviet Union. And you didn't believe that the government was capable of hijacking its own aircraft and killing its own citizens. President Kennedy had always been a servant of the elite, but he was so shocked by the Northwoods document that he signed Executive Order 11110 shortly before his death, announcing that he would abolish the Federal Reserve System. He also began to pull us out of Vietnam and signed an order to abolish the CIA. It was at that point that he was assassinated. You see, he had decided to be a leader of the people, to defend their interest, and the New World Order couldn't allow that to happen. Now you'll see the evidence of the federal government targeting the World Trade Center twice. October 28th, 93, and October 31st, 1993, New York Times, as well as the December 15th Chicago Tribune. The federal government was actually caught on tape by their informants, ordering them to let the bombing go forward, to cook the bomb, to give the terrorists the detonators, to create yet another crisis, this time to usher in a police state and a war upon the American people. Unlike the Northwoods plan, the FBI actually carried out the attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. They actually hired a retired 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, Ahmad Salam, and paid him $1 million and gave him real explosives, a detonator, and told him to build a bomb and to give it to the foolish people that he was controlling to allow them to attack the World Trade Center complex. There was only one problem with their plan. Mr. Salam was not as ruthless and sociopathic as the FBI and their globalist controllers. He began to get very concerned right before and, of course, after the attack, saying, "Why are you giving me real explosives if this is just a sting operation?" When they told him to go ahead and let the attack go forward, he secretly recorded the head of the FBI in New York ordering him to let the bombing take place. It's very important to understand that all the evidence you just saw is documented, 110%. It is part of the public record. The FBI admits it, but the media wrote a few stories about it. There were a couple of nightly newscasts. It was never heard of again. But unlike Pearl Harbor, where the government allowed the Japanese to attack as a pretext for war, the federal government financed and controlled this attack on the World Trade Center to create a system of anti-terrorism, to sic a homeland security system on the American people. There was only one problem. The drivers of the truck didn't park it up against the main support column as they had been ordered to do by Mr. Salam and the FBI. No, my friends, they parked it about a dozen feet away, and so it didn't bring down the building. And in consequence, they didn't get the massive death toll they needed to create the martial law system they were hell-bent on implementing against our constitutional republic and the American people. To the American people's horror, the feds finished the job on September 11, 2001. April 19th, 1995, in downtown Oklahoma City, multiple bombs ripped through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. And as usual, federal fingerprints were all over this tragic event. Then President Bill Clinton, taking his orders from on high from the New World Order chieftains, needed a crisis to get his gun control agenda through, as well as his plans for a socialized America. Taking a page out of the Strong Men's Handbook, Bill Clinton knew that a crisis of this magnitude, endless images of mangled children, would pull on the heartstrings of the American people, and they would beg for the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act that he had failed to pass just a year before. The bill absolutely eviscerated massive sections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We've been investigating this tragedy for over 6 years. The amount of evidence is staggering. Let's just hit some of the key points. Now let's get into it.
Station that one explosion caused, because here's now what we are starting to learn about the succession, or what someone obviously hoped would be a succession of explosions. The first bomb that was in the federal building did go off. It did the damage that you see right there. The second explosive was found and diffused. The third explosive that was found, and they are working on right now as we speak, I understand, both the second and third explosives, if you can imagine this, were larger than the first. So try to imagine two or threefold happening what we've already seen there. It is just incredible to think that there was that much heavy artillery that was somehow moved into the downtown Oklahoma City Federal Building.
Two other explosive devices were found that were not detonated, and they were larger than the first.
I think he said another bomb.
Oh my God, another bomb.
We just saw, if you were watching there was a white pickup truck backing a trailer into the scene here. They're trying to move people out of the way so they can get it in. Appears to be the Oklahoma County Bomb Squad. It's their bomb disposal unit, essentially, is what it is, and it is what they would use to, if the report that we gave you just a few moments ago turns out to be correct, that they have found a second explosive device of some kind inside this building. They'll back that trailer down there, and the bomb squad folks will go in, and they will use that trailer. You see the bucket on the back there, sort of, this is how they would transport the explosive device away from this populated area to try to do something with it.
The Justice Department is reporting that a second explosive device has been found in the A.P. Murrah building in downtown Oklahoma City. Mike, you're still with us, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and I might tell you in addition to that, in fact, what we were told at the scene a few minutes ago was that, in fact, two different explosive devices were found in addition to the one that went off.
So a total of three,
A total of three.
Now confirmed through federal authorities that a second bomb has been found inside that federal building in Oklahoma City. It was an explosion at 9 o'clock this morning that did that damage you're looking at right there, blowing off the entire north face of that building. Again, you're looking at the north face there. A second bomb was found on the east side of that building. A bomb squad is on the scene. That second bomb has not exploded. We don't know quite the status yet, if they've managed to defuse it, but it has been confirmed that a second bomb was found on the east side.
I have is that one device was deactivated. Apparently there's another device, and obviously whatever did the damage to the Murrah building was a tremendous, very sophisticated explosive device.
So President Clinton just called Frank Keating, Governor Frank Keating, and he says that 3 FBI anti-terrorist teams are en route to Oklahoma City. Right now, they are saying that this is the work of a sophisticated group. This is a very sophisticated device, and it has to have been done by an explosives expert. Obviously, with this type of explosion.
The medical teams downtown are unable to get into the wreckage to retrieve more of the injured because of the presence of other bombs in the area.
Well, I just took a look down the street at the Murrah building again. I see another bomb truck going, so apparently they're going to try to get out that third bomb that's been talked about. Still a lot of activity around the Murrah building. Security concerns that another one still might go off.
Fortunately, it didn't, because the second device that they found, we understand, was even more powerful than the first. They then found a third device, and you can see the look on this woman's face at the fear that she might have to go through the same thing again. They then found a third device, which was also larger than the first. Hard to feel lucky at this point, but certainly through some good work by some munitions experts and the explosive sniffing dogs, further tragedy has almost certainly been averted here.
But it was a great stroke of luck that we actually have got diffused bombs. It's through the bomb material that we will be able to track down who committed this atrocity.
It would have been an incredible help to have been able to get a hold of those unexploded bombs. Unfortunately, the BATF, according to police and firefighter testimony, were inside removing them and spiriting them away because they had to keep their story straight that there was only one bomb, a truck bomb. Out of hundreds of people we interviewed, we couldn't find a single person who said they'd heard only one explosion.
But
Did you live here, Charles, at the time of the bomb?
I live here. I work right here in this building. I was at work. At work.
Did you feel it?
Yeah, I thought this building was blowing up.
How many blasts did you feel?
2.
And how far apart were they?
Oh, probably about boom, and then it's boom.
It's a historical fact, part of the public record, that there were multiple devices inside the Oklahoma City building, and that there were at least 2 explosions. The emergency radio transmission transcripts show clearly that the police and firefighters were on the record witnessing the BATF removing unexploded devices. But you see, we have the actual scientific fact. We have the University of Oklahoma's own seismograph reports, as well as the U.S. Geological Survey reports. 2 different scientific institutions showing multiple explosions. But you see, McVeigh would have had accomplices, and that didn't fit in to the federal story, especially if the reality showed that it had to be somebody who had access to a federal building for long extended periods of time. General Benton K. Parton is the former head of Air Force weapons development and had over 30-plus years running the Air Force weapons development program. He has multiple engineering degrees. General Parton was amazed by press reports claiming the building had been blown in and that a truck bomb could cause that damage, when even basic understanding of explosive signatures shows that the building was blown not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Within days of the blast, General Benton K. Parton was on the scene. But of course he was barred access. But from video as well as photographs of the columns, it was obvious to any trained eye that the columns had been blown off by shape charges. In a detailed report, the former head of Air Force weapons development laid out the physics, the mathematics. It was a physical impossibility for a truck bomb, even made of military-grade explosives, couldn't even begin to approach the damage that was brought against the Oklahoma City Federal Building. Now the seismographs come in. You see, the seismographs first registered one distinct explosion and then a group of explosions so close to each other that they couldn't be separated. You see, the feds had to have a diversionary blast. They had to be able to tell the world that it was that lone nut McVeigh out front. You see, they needed McVeigh's truck bomb outside so they could cover the fact that there was actually explosives inside the structure. And if you look at the actual crater that was there, it was so small it could hardly be measured. But later in media reports, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. Another key piece of evidence that General Parton raises is that a single bomb explosion cannot account for the failure of column B, which was further from the truck bomb than columns B4 and B5, which did not fail. He concludes that the asymmetrical nature of the damage to the Murrah building is one indication of demolition charges were being used in the bombing. In modern history, literally thousands of structures of every type and design have been destroyed commercially to make way for new structures. But that didn't matter to the BATF, the federal government, and the media. They turned structural engineering on its head, telling the world that a single truck bomb actually did this damage, and with this signature that clearly showed that the building had been blown out, not in. Not only was the scientific and engineering world in shocked disbelief, the general public wasn't buying the story because they'd seen what had happened. Now let's go to an actual news report the day of the tragedy.
Some of the floors have just crashed together. I mean, there are some points where you just literally can't get in at all. And then from Chopper 4, at some particular points, we could see all the way through the building. That's the force of the explosion. It just blew out all the walls and everything inside. Blew out all the walls, blew out all the walls, blew out all the walls.
Outraged by the federal cover-up, leaders from across Oklahoma, led by State Representative Charles Key, banded together to put together the final report, 550 pages detailing this criminal federal operation. Now let's look at the cowardice of the BATF. You see, they got a warning, but they didn't pass it on to the children in the daycare center.
What he told him is that he thought that they had received a tip that morning of the bomb.
Yet another witness, a rescue worker, says after she talked with an agent at the bombing scene, she also suspected the ATF was warned and agents stayed away from their office that morning.
I asked him if his office was in the building, and he said yes, and I asked if there were any ATF agents that were still in the building, and he said no, we weren't here.
Witness number 1 approached an ATF agent nearby. He claims he asked the agent what had happened, and witness number 1 says this is what the agent told him.
He started getting a little bit nervous. He tried reaching somebody on a two-way radio. Couldn't get anybody, and I told him I wanted an answer right then. He said they were in debriefing. None of the agents had been in there. They had been tipped by their pagers not to come into work that day. Plain as day out of his mouth. They were tipped. Why wasn't anybody else? There was a lot of people, good people, died down there. And if they knew, they should have let everybody else know.
Oklahoma City paramedic Tiffany Bible, who heroically responded just minutes after the blast on April 19, 1995, swore in an affidavit that when she arrived, the BATF was in full mop gear, bomb gear that takes at least 30 minutes to put on. When she asked them, oh my goodness, were you guys hurt inside the blast? They said, no, we got tipped off by our pagers not to come in today.
Agents forewarned about a bomb in Oklahoma City. Did they know the Murrah building was a target? The ATF says no, absolutely not. But tonight in a story you'll see only on the news channel, you're about to hear otherwise from people who were at the Murrah building that morning.
We're asking simple questions and we can't get any answers, so it makes us that much more curious, you know. Where the hell were they?
The news channel did ask for a private meeting with ATF officials to discuss the credibility of these witness reports. But the ATF refused, saying they had no more to say on the subject.
Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and so did Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City. So we're meant to believe. But hundreds of eyewitnesses reported seeing Middle Eastern men crawling all over this operation. Let's look at John Doe number 2.
Because I sat there and I seen McVeigh was with another person.
Do you have any doubt in your mind that there was a passenger in the Ryder truck?
That's even more. I have no doubt there was definitely a second person, no matter what. There was 2 people in this vehicle.
John Doe number 2, and there was a $2 million price put on his head, and now they're saying there's no John Doe number 2.
And our witnesses picked out of photo lineups. The news channel shared the information and surveillance tapes of this man with the FBI. They've had some of that material long before our reports went on the air.
In the building, and I looked out the window, and I seen the Ryder's truck, and I seen the man get out of the Ryder's truck.
She was just 10 feet away from the man depicted in this sketch when he stepped out of the Ryder truck.
He was olive complexion, and he had black curly hair. He was wearing the baseball cap, but his curls were sticking out of his head. It was short in the back, but you could still see the curls in his hair. He was not American. He was foreign. You can tell by his skin, his face, the way his face was.
We asked FBI Dan Vogel if John Doe number 2 is still part of the investigation. Does he exist? The answer, yes. The FBI is still trying to locate and identify John Doe number 2. The man in our reports is Iraqi. Today, the FBI says they are not pursuing a Middle Eastern connection. This doesn't mean it has been ruled out. That could change tomorrow.
State, local, and federal police around the country actually detained dozens of Middle Eastern men trying to exit the country. Former Iraqi Republican Guard officers like Al Husseini Hussein. Despite all this evidence, the Clinton Justice Department said, release them. We don't want to talk to them. There is no Middle Eastern connection. In the making of this documentary film, our team has interviewed scores of former FBI agents, current FBI agents, police officers, detectives who were on the scene and who worked the case. They arrested members of the Iraqi Republican Guard while trying to flee the United States. They would open up their bags and find blue jogging suits, bomb-making materials. They would try to hold them, try to charge them. They could have convicted them in front of a jury, according to my sources. But Bill Clinton demanded their release. Later, I interviewed David Shippers, the man that impeached Bill Clinton, that brought down the mob in Chicago. And David Shippers stated that the Oklahoma City bombing team was the same people involved in the World Trade Center attack on September 11th. And guess what? Al Husseini Hussein was actually working in the Boston airport. It's amazing. Now we see the grand plan of the feds. These people are actually working for them. All the evidence shows.
And the details are chilling. We'll also focus on surveillance cameras that caught the bombing on tape and maybe the men behind the bombing. The News Channel has new information tonight that there's a chance surveillance tapes could be the smoking gun evidence. Now, we asked candid questions in a rare face-to-face meeting with ATF officials close to the investigation. We learned that video collected from downtown businesses the morning of April 19th may someday be played before a jury. Officials won't say who or what exactly is on the tape. However, numerous sources have confirmed the tapes exist and that they reveal more than one bomber.
So what evidence are they asking for? They're asking for video taken from the Ryder truck from the Rigi Towers.
Well, Kevin, it's a question we've all been asking. We've been asking that question since we first broke the story that surveillance cameras aimed at the federal building could have captured all those involved on tape. Now, sources have confirmed those tapes exist and that they show more than one bomber. The FBI also confirmed those tapes exist when they refused to release them, claiming the video is part of a criminal investigation. And now, for the first time, we get an on-the-record response from the head of the Dallas office, ATF. We learned that videotape could be unveiled as part of the prosecution's case. No officials will discuss specifically what's on the video, but we have been able to recreate some of what may have been captured by downtown surveillance cameras through the eyes of the witnesses. Now, you're looking at a computer recreation of the final movements of the Ryder truck according to the people who crossed its path at 5th and Harvey, moments before the explosion. Tonight at 10, the witnesses will detail their memories of how they believe the suspects carried out the crime and made their getaway. Now, all these accounts share a common and unsettling similarity. The witnesses say they saw several accomplices, including the infamous John Doe No. 2. ATF officials tell us the elusive John Doe is still part of this case, but will not comment any further. However, they did tell us that there's a lot about this case we don't know yet, information you can't find in the indictments against Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, and Michael Fortier.
It was just hours after the bombing when the News Channel first told you about the possibility that surveillance cameras may have captured the explosion and the killers on tape. Our sources and sources for the LA Times describe what's actually on those tapes. The information shows some huge surprises, the biggest that it may have been John Doe No. 2, not Timothy McVeigh, who detonated the bomb. Brad Edwards has the latest on the investigation in this exclusive News Channel report.
Our new information comes directly from a source that has seen parts of those surveillance tapes. It also comes from reports now in the Los Angeles Times. But perhaps the biggest surprise is contained in the News Channel's own information. Timothy McVeigh was not the last person to leave the Ryder truck. In fact, another man sat inside the cab of the truck after McVeigh got out. We believe that man is John Doe No. 2, a man who, for all we know, is still on the loose, leaving open a vital question. Was it John Doe No. 2 who actually set off the bomb, not Timothy McVeigh, as we've all been led to believe? News Channel 4 has for weeks been demanding copies of the surveillance tapes from the FBI. The federal government so far is dragging its feet. But many people in the investigation have seen the tapes, and now so has a source willing to describe to the News Channel what the tapes show. The LA Times report shows there was a surveillance camera near the corner of 5th and Harvey and another near the corner of 5th and Robinson. Federal investigators recreated the time sequence leading up to the bombing by matching the video and still photos from the surveillance cameras. Since we can't show you the tape ourselves, we're reenacting what our source says he saw on those tapes. As witnesses told the news channel before, the tape showed the Ryder truck parked in front of the Murrah building where we now know the blast went off. As witnesses also told us, the tape showed two men sitting inside the Ryder truck. A man strongly resembling Timothy McVeigh gets out of the driver's side, steps down. He then appears to have dropped something on the step up into the truck. He bends down and appears to pick something up off the step. Then he turns and walks directly across 5th Street toward the Journal Record building. All this time, John Doe number 2 is still inside the Ryder truck's cab, sitting on the passenger side. Time passes. The surveillance tape is time-lapse photography. Without knowing exactly the time interval between shots, our source can't be sure how long John Doe number 2 sat in that cab. What was he doing all that time? Then the tape shows John Doe number 2 getting out of the passenger side of the Ryder truck. Again, the tape shows that a bombing witness accurately described what happened next to News Channel 4.
I was standing in the building, and I looked out the window, and I seen the Ryder's truck, and I seen the man get out of the Ryder's truck.
The tape shows John Doe number 2 getting out, shutting the passenger side door. He steps toward the front of the truck and is momentarily out of the frame of the surveillance camera. But shortly, he appears back in frame, walking toward the rear of the truck, still on the sidewalk in front of the Murrah building. Again, he turns east toward the front of the truck, looking toward the street. John Doe number 2 then walks diagonally across 5th Street toward the east, as if heading toward the YMCA or the intersection of 5th and Robinson. He again leaves the frame of the camera. Another camera shooting from another angle clearly shows the actual explosion that destroyed the federal building and killed 169 people. So what does the mysterious John Doe number 2 look like in the tapes? The man who stayed inside the Ryder truck, possibly triggering the bomb? Well, his features are obscured by a baseball cap in the portion of tape seen by our source, the same kind of cap shown in the composite drawing first released of John Doe number 2. The cap was a sports cap, flame style. The man himself was taller than the man resembling McVeigh and much thicker in build. He appears to have a dark or olive complexion. Our source saw only a few minutes of tape. He didn't see all of the almost 20 minutes of surveillance tapes that reportedly were distributed to FBI agents around the country to help in their investigation. But they do show enough to raise some crucial questions. Who actually set off the bomb? What was John Doe number 2 doing in the cab of the truck after the McVeigh lookalike got out? And how did John Doe number 2 get away from the Murrah building?
My understanding is there was a video of McVeigh getting out of the Ryder truck, jumping into this other pickup with John Doe number 2. Well, where's that video? Are we ever going to get to see it?
Do you realize what you've just seen, America? The government had multiple surveillance camera tapes. In fact, when it finally came out in court, when the federal government declared in 2001 that they wouldn't release the videotapes because of national security implications, that there were actually 12 surveillance camera tapes that had these different Islamic individuals, these Arabic men with McVeigh and others, as well as the BATF hiding out right down the street, preparing to pounce on the operation and declare themselves the heroes, the saviors, the victims. Think about it. Now in 2001 and right into 2002, the federal government claims national security and refuses to release 12-plus surveillance camera tapes. What are they hiding? And the feds never tried to use it in court. I mean, if they had McVeigh pulling up alone and bombing the building and it was just a truck bomb, why not use the actual surveillance camera tapes to do it? But they didn't do that. You have to ask yourselves why. What's on that tape? Well, after you've seen all this evidence, it's clear. Federal involvement. Ratcheting up the police state right here in America. Danny Coulson, the FBI's top counterterrorism agent, checked into an Oklahoma City hotel nearly 9 hours before a truck bomb nearly leveled the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The Embassy Suites Hotel receipt of Danny Coulson, the director of the FBI's terrorist task force and founding commander of the Bureau's hostage rescue team, was dated April 19, 1995, with a check-in time of 0:20. That's military time for 12:20 a.m. Almost 9 hours before the blast, Chief Agent Coulson lied to the American people. He told a Time magazine reporter in 1999 the harrowing tale of how he sped at over 100 miles an hour from his home in Dallas, trying to get there after the bombing to save people and conduct an investigation. Oh, and by the way, the FBI won't release any of the credit card statements and records for any of their agents. What are they trying to hide?
The system wasn't working. Going through the system didn't work. I did everything that they advised me to do. It didn't do any good.
Hoppy Heidelberg was an upstanding member of the community with no criminal record. He'd been a grand juror for years. But when he started asking questions about the Middle Eastern connection and FBI prior knowledge and BATF involvement, the FBI actually came to his house brandishing firearms and told him to shut his mouth if he knew what was good for him. When he refused to be part of the cover-up and demanded that he be able to call witnesses as his right as a grand juror, the judge kicked him off the case. Just one more piece of this massive cover-up.
The news channel has learned of another strange development. Apparently, before the bombing, Governor Frank Keating's brother, Mark, had been working on a novel about a terrorist bombing in Oklahoma City. Stranger still, one of the characters in the novel was named Thomas McVeigh.
Governor Frank Keating's brother, Martin Keating, wrote The Final Jihad. In the book, Tom McVeigh masterminds the bombing of the Oklahoma City building. He dedicated the book to the Knights of the Secret Circle, a known Illuminati group. And he wrote the book 2 years before the bombing. The tragic events of Oklahoma City, if the truth was known to the public, makes it even more tragic, even more horrific. You see, it's now a monument to the police state, a monument to the sacrifice the government made of American lives, of American blood, of American tears, as an excuse to get the feds to be able to circle the wagons against the American people, to have a pretext, an excuse to expand their police state. They covered the whole operation up. It's clear that they had prior knowledge that multiple bombs were detonated on the inside of the building, that the feds have grabbed the 12 surveillance camera tapes and are refusing to release them, even in 2002. Threatening grand jurors, destroying the building and burying it under guard. The federal government blamed this tragic event on Christians, conservatives, gun owners. But if you look at the evidence, it's clear who's behind it. The federal government. And they use this, just like Hitler used the Reichstag, to get martial law cranking in America.
$62 million is coming to Oklahoma soon to help anti-terrorism and disaster relief efforts.
Government crime certainly does pay, especially when it's government-sponsored terrorism against its own institutions. That's right, the BATF locally got tens of millions of dollars extra funding, but so did every other federal agency that tries to control the American people. $24 billion increase in anti-terrorism funds. And after September 11th, they've now tripled that. And of course, the BATF ensured that the building was completely demolished, so there couldn't be any evidence of their heinous acts. And that's right, ladies and gentlemen, they actually buried the building under guard at a private landfill with Wackenhut guards protecting it. From A to Z, federal fingerprints all over it and doing everything they can to suppress the truth. For Bill Clinton, the servant of the New World Order, whose approval rating exploded after the attack, and his attack dog, the butcher of Waco, Reno. She was very happy to blame it on Christians and conservatives and gun owners. It was her excuse to expand federal control over local police and to merge the military with the police in new giant anti-terrorism training camps where the military and the police prepare for mass gun confiscation and extermination of the American people. Evidence of that's coming up later.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
You've seen the evidence of government-sponsored terrorism throughout history. Now let's take a closer look at what happened on September 11th, 2001, and how it's being used to usher in a new world order.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea. A new world order where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The Council on Foreign Relations, known as the CFR, an organization publicly sworn to destroy American national sovereignty and usher in a tyrannical world police state, could not contain their glee on September 12th, the day after the tragic attack. They announced their New World Order.
There is a chance for the President of the United States to use this disaster to carry out what his father, a phrase his father used, I think, only once, and hasn't been used since, and that is a New World Order.
There it is, the CFR actually admitting that this crisis was helping them to bring in a New World Order, global government. And how would they get that job done? You see, for decades, going back to Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski, the National Security Advisor, they had been breeding, creating these terrorist organizations, funding them and training them to attack America. Brzezinski, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission with David Rockefeller and other luminaries of the global system, actually bragged in his 1998 book, these criminals love to brag, The Grand Chessboard, of how America would be attacked by Afghan terrorists and how global government, a war for global government, would then take place in Central Asia. How it could be used to roll out national ID cards and a global police state here in the United States. All of this being planned back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The relationship between the CIA and the Afghan freedom fighters, the Mujahideen, even predates Ronald Reagan. The bonds that were forged there with the Central Intelligence Agency led to the creation of their super asset, Osama bin Laden, the rich Saudi Arabian sheik whose family to this day builds all U.S. military bases in the Middle East, North Africa, and in Central Asia. It's on the record that bin Laden's a CIA asset, and every time an American president needs a distraction overseas, a ship or an embassy gets blown up. On October 12, 1998, the USS Cole, while docked at the port of Aden in Yemen, was attacked. 17 Americans were killed, 39 wounded. Sacrifice yet again on the altar of globalism. Just like clockwork, every time Bill Clinton was in trouble, an embassy, a ship, a barracks was blown up. Just like Oklahoma City, the CIA asset bin Laden was delivering time and time again, and Bill Clinton was there protecting him, refusing to allow foreign countries like Sudan, even Iraq and Afghanistan, to give them the files of where al-Qaeda was in the world, and yes, where they were active even in the continental United States. Sudan even offered to arrest bin Laden 3 separate times. Bill Clinton answered by bombing with state-of-the-art cruise missiles their only pharmaceutical plant. Denying Africa desperately needed medicines. You see, in reality, it's a lot bigger than just Republican or Democrat. The reality is the Central Intelligence Agency, controlled by Wall Street, has been grooming this creature and his family over the last 50 years to carry out dangerous projects in the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa. Back in 1996, the CIA worked in tandem with Pakistan to create the Taliban. Then in 1998, when the Afghans offered to arrest bin Laden, the CIA responded, publicly telling him to do no such thing. They needed this boogeyman for one more big action, and his family the entire time was being rewarded with giant satellite company deals, oil company mergers, and some of the biggest construction projects in the world.
New world coming. America will become increasingly vulnerable to hostile attack on our homeland, and our military superiority will not entirely protect us. Americans will likely die on American soil, possibly in large numbers. Americans will likely die on American soil, possibly in large numbers. Possibly in large numbers. Possibly in large numbers.
Shortly after September 11th, witnesses came forward documenting that bin Laden had actually met and planned the September 11th attacks with the CIA for 10 days in Dubai in an American Army hospital. French intelligence was so upset by what they had learned that they actually got media reports published before September 11th, specifically warning that bin Laden was planning to hijack aircraft and fly them into tall buildings in downtown Manhattan, as well as the Pentagon. Of course, the Pentagon, the Defense Department, didn't need to be warned. First media reports that came out said that 5 of the hijackers had been trained at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. Later media reports in the Pensacola News Journal confirmed that 3 of the hijackers had been trained at the Pensacola Naval Air Station 2 years before September 11th. The San Francisco Chronicle also reported that one of the top lieutenants of Al-Qaeda was actually an FBI asset, not to mention a member of the U.S. Army. The next piece of evidence you're about to see is the biggest smoking gun of them all. President George W. Bush signed Presidential Decision Directive W199I, telling FBI agents as well as defense intelligence officers that if they tried to stop Al-Qaeda, they would be arrested under national security implications. It's been in every publication from the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Times. Actual lawsuits have now been filed by FBI agents who are outraged by the fact that they were not allowed to stop Al-Qaeda. The global crime syndicate that George W. Bush and his family fronts for has everything to gain from the September 11th attacks: a national ID card, a national control grid, a cashless society. It's part of the public record. George Bush signed the documents threatening defense intelligence and FBI agents with arrest if they stopped Al-Qaeda. This is the most absolutely treasonous, treacherous thing he could possibly do. George Bush is a mass murderer. Before the Bush administration shut him down, CNN's American Morning with Paula Zahn actually reported that FBI Deputy Director John O'Neill resigned because he felt the U.S. administration was obstructing the FBI and their attempt to stop Al-Qaeda. They went on to report that Bush signed W199I, restricting the investigation. Again, this is high treason, absolute fact. George Bush signed this public document. BBC has a copy of it, and George Bush is an intimate partner with bin Laden, a traitor to America. Months before September 11, 2001, Indian as well as Pakistani diplomats had gone public with the fact that U.S. Special Forces were massing in Tajikistan, preparing for a full-scale invasion of Afghanistan. So the U.S. government was massing troops outside Afghanistan, publicly getting ready for an invasion right before September 11th. Another smoking gun, another red flag. We already talked about the Deputy FBI Director, John O'Neill, quitting because George Bush signed an order not allowing him to stop Al-Qaeda. You're probably wondering, why doesn't he go public now? Well, there's a problem. Mr. O'Neill is dead. His new job was working as the head of security for the World Trade Center complex, and he died in the collapse of September 11th, his first day on the job. The Bush and bin Laden family connection goes back over half a century. And by the 1970s, George Bush Jr. as well as Osama bin Laden and his big brother were already vacationing together, owning airports as well as oil companies together. Even before September 11th, the Wall Street Journal had called for the Bush family to end their relationship with the bin Ladens. Then, of course, there's the Carlyle Group, the biggest defense contractor on the planet. And guess who the majority owners are? The Bush family and the bin Ladens. They could profit in the hundreds of billions off of this new war. Now you begin to understand what's fueling these criminal activities. Money and power. Dozens of respected publications have asked a simple question: what brought those buildings down? Especially Building 7 that wasn't even hit by an aircraft. Lou Caccioli, a 51-year-old firefighter in New York who was trapped inside the building, reported that multiple bombs were going off all around him. There are other eyewitnesses, former military munitions experts and police officers, as well as structural engineers. The oldest firefighting magazine in the country was absolutely outraged, demanding a real investigation. According to their evidence, there's no way that aircraft could have brought down those buildings. And don't forget Building 7. Nothing hit Building 7, but still it collapsed in a symmetrical fashion. The September 12, 2001 San Francisco Chronicle reported that Mayor Willie Brown was warned by the federal government not to fly on September 11th. He was warned the evening before. Now, of course, under pressure from the White House, Willie Brown refuses to say exactly what federal agency warned him, just that he was warned not to fly on September 11th. I wish the rest of the American people would have gotten that warning. But of course, if the American people would have been warned, then the government terrorist attack wouldn't have had its desired effect, to have the people begging for a nightmare global police state. On September 3rd, Salman Rushdie, author of the Satanic Verses, got a warning from the U.S. authorities not to fly. They went so far as to ban him publicly from flying, and the FAA admits they did it on the record. More chilling evidence of the U.S. government's prior knowledge. But you're saying, hey, wait a minute, what was that whole war about? We went in there and took out the Taliban. No, they escorted a couple hundred goat herders to torture them publicly at Camp X-Ray in Guantanamo Bay. The real leadership of Al-Qaeda and Taliban, the few that were left in Afghanistan when the war started, were flown out to safety and paid in gold bars in Pakistan by the U.S. federal government. Here's George Bush at the United Nations telling the people not to tolerate anyone that investigates these facts.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
I guess it's un-American to investigate the facts. Let's just call it a conspiracy theory, especially those FBI agents that have gone public about George Bush telling him not to stop Al-Qaeda.
Conspiracy theories, conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
What you're about to hear is not a Freudian slip. It's a carefully crafted speech as Bush throws it in your face about dark cults of evil gaining power off of human suffering.
The hijackers were instruments of evil who died in vain. Behind them is a cult of evil which seeks to harm the innocent and thrives on human suffering. Theirs is the worst kind of cruelty. The cruelty that is fed, not weakened, by tears. Theirs is the worst kind of violence. Pure malice while daring to claim the authority of God. We cannot fully understand the designs and power of evil. It is enough to know that evil, like goodness, exists. And in the terrorist, evil has found a willing servant. Evil has found a willing servant.
Evil has found a willing servant.
Son of a gun. You thought I was going to say son of a bitch, didn't you?